this a computer? You have to say yes, I think, right? Yes, you have to say yes. You say yes. So, Lisa, I have
Yes,
to tell
Roger.
you, our conversation that precluded this interview was one of the most interesting conversations that I've had in a really, really, really long time. And that's going to sound like I'm pandering, but at the same time, it's when someone finds a seam and a gap in what is an apparently homogenous group of situations are always very interesting to me. And so when you and I were having this discussion about human wiring, it was like, I've heard this concept discussed previously, but not in this way. So that was why I was so interested to bring you onto the show. And then secondarily, we've been talking about this now for probably the last 3 or 4 episodes about this idea of there being friction in the marketplace. There's a lot of friction in the marketplace because what the pandemic has done is it's created a lot of gaps, right? So prior to the pandemic, things were humming and there really wasn't much of an opportunity to look for those gaps because we were all just focused on getting orders out the door, making sure that all of the business that we could get our hands on was captured and recorded and invoiced and billed and collected upon. And then pause, big pause, big changes. So as things start to restart again, okay, I guess we'll allow ourselves to get away with that. It's creating these gaps and these seams that we're all as entrepreneurs are witnessing in the economy, which represents opportunity.
Yeah.
And yet, on the other hand, because we're not able to get butts in chairs, we're not able to capitalize as well on those opportunities that we sense. And so you sense this incredible amount of friction. And like the major question we're going to talk about today is, and we're going to get to your reasoning why you think this is the case, is, but like, why aren't people going back to work in the jobs that they used to do? And, you know, depending on where you come out on this spectrum, some people will say, well, the government is giving people too much money, you know, be that as it may, if it is or is not true, you know, there's this childcare, and can I reliably go back to what I used to do, not knowing whether or not my kid's going to go to school tomorrow because of a quarantine? Maybe I don't want to go back to a place where I'm being told I have to wear a mask. Maybe I think that there's an opportunity for me to get a better job than I used to be able to get before, or maybe I like working from home and I don't want to go back to the office. So all of these things have created a tremendous amount of friction. And here's Lisa standing on the mountaintop, shouting from the precipice, saying, this is about alignment, people. It's about alignment. And so how these lost jobs are really playing into people having to reassess what it is that they want to do with their lives. And this notion of human wiring that you've been able to develop, I think in a lot of ways, these things go together hand in hand. So thank you for joining me on the show. That's a really long open, but I really want to frame the conversation and give our listeners an understanding of, like, you have a tremendous wealth of knowledge. You have this extensive career in corporate America. You know, you and I have talked about this, like we each have almost a millennium, like a whole generation of our lives were dedicated to working in big corporate environments. And we're bringing a lot of the things that we learned during that phase of our careers into this phase of our careers by virtue of the research that goes along with the experience that we've been able to I don't know, enjoy or suffer, or however you want to frame that. So
enjoy is good. Enjoy. Well, and you know, think about it. Not a lot of people do have successfully navigated both corporate America and then entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
the two are so different, and yet there are a number. You nailed it, Roger. Alignment. You gotta live in alignment. And I think you highlighted some important things that I think really hit people that they were confronted with, which is, what do I want for my life? How can I do work that's in alignment with who I am in an environment that has a real mission, right? A real vision out in the world. And I think that's what people got disconnected with in their work was, am I working for a company that has a bigger contribution that they're making in the world? Because people want to be part of something bigger. And many companies, they have the vision, they have their mission, maybe they have their values, and it was an exercise that they did once and put a nice little poster on the wall, and that's where it stayed. They didn't use those very foundational things, those foundational tools to create their culture, what we call the culture of distinction, and a distinctive culture that people are part of. So now what happened is everybody started working virtually, or many people did, and they got disconnected. Now they started saying, is this where I want to be? And there was no integration of, that was what the company was standing for, what they were really standing for in the world, because they never had that before. But the companies that did then were able to go back to their foundational principles and say, this is what we're about. And in some cases, they realize, we've got to recreate ourselves.
Yeah. You hit it on the head. And how that's manifested itself in my peer group largely has to do with many of the salespeople in the promotional marketing industry are career salespeople who are in their early to mid, maybe even late 50s, and they lost their jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Because the stuff that we make is exchanged in person-to-person encounters. So when there's all of these shelter-in-place orders, no more person-to-person encounters means no more promotional marketing items being exchanged. So we had people who had literally spent their entire careers doing one thing and one thing only, suddenly found themselves out of a job. And what I was able to witness in those conversations that I had with people who were faced with that decision, once they got over the grief and the sadness and the anger, all of the things that go through mourning of the loss of one's career, really boiled down to one sentence, which was roughly, if I'm going to be broke, I might as well do something that I love, right? And so when we talk about alignment, to me, what I think the pandemic really did is it created a forced alignment opportunity, where previously there really wasn't much need to do that because I had a job, I was making a decent living, whether or not I really liked what I was doing or not was really unimportant. And there were so many things going on that I just felt like, well, maybe I was too busy to consider some of these other opportunities that might be out there, or perhaps I hadn't given myself the opportunity to sit in silence and think about what is it that I really want to have be a part of what I do when I go up and get up and do what I do for money on a day in and day out basis. And now we had ample opportunity to do that. And so certainly you look at job statistics, the last couple of months, we've seen some pretty staggering statistics of people going back to work. And yet, again, when we get back to this discussion of friction, so many marketplaces are struggling to find the right people to do the work that are necessary. So there's so much within this onion that I think the human wiring aspect has a way of helping bring some clarity to it. But before we kind of get down into that level, talk a little bit about when I say human wiring, like what the heck are we even talking about right now?
Thank you. I think it's important to distinguish human wiring, because a lot of times people collapse human wiring, behaviors, and personality, right? And so they collapse them all together and think that they're one thing. They're actually three distinctions. And, I like to have the nurture versus nature conversation. You don't behave the same way that you did when you were 18, right? Let's hope not. And why? Because of all those things that nurtured you growing up, your education, your parents, your culture, your experiences, all of those things nurtured your behaviors. So you learn to behave a certain way. But your human wiring is part of your nature. So as the neural pathways in your brain are developing, it's telling me, how does this person best create ideas? How does this person process thought? What is the environment in which this person best thrives? And how much certainty or information does this person need for effective decision making? And those can be measured through something called psychometrics. And it's how an assessment is administered that will get to that part of the brain that gives us the natural response to things versus the behavioral response to things. And so we can measure that using psychometrics and get to the natural part of that. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Roger, is when we can, and I often say, when you can work in alignment with who you are innately, it's not work. It's fun, right? And so when we understand these different distinctions and then align that to the work we do, and when employers do that, and they align that person with a job they have available, now that is ideal. And why? Because now you've got a person who is doing a job that they are innately wired to do. And that's when you have an amazing mix, and it wins for everybody, wins in that case.
The best way I can describe what you're talking about in a real world situation has to do with a conversation that I had with a family member just this past weekend. She worked in the service industry and had a pretty long career doing that. And, you know, a lot of people see service career jobs as sort of like entry level, or, you know, you do that until you get, quote, a better job.
Mm-hmm.
And she's done incredibly well for herself. She's provided for her family. They don't hurt for things. She's actually created somewhat of a personal brand when it came to what she was capable of doing, to the point that when she would make changes from one employer to another, it was often at the behest of the recruiting employer wanting that brand that she created to be brought to their place of business as opposed to where that person. So better jobs, better pay, you know, all of the same things that people are looking for when they're making these decisions right now about, like, well, you know, I'm going to go do something different than I did before. And she is incredibly frustrated. The service job that she had prior to the pandemic is gone. That restaurant shut down. It was a high-end restaurant where she made significant hundreds of dollars every night in gratuities, done really well for herself. And she said to me, she said, you know, I'm not sure that there's anyone else out there that has what I want anymore. And so what I realize now is I still have these same gifts, but I recognize that maybe I need to deliver them in a different way. And I don't know what that looks like yet, so I haven't made a choice. And so I think there's a lot of people that will listen to this right now who may be in a similar situation, who haven't even gotten that far, that they're saying, like, I just know I don't want to do what I used to do.
Yes.
So how do you use some of what you've learned in research to help? Like, give me some examples of situations that are a reflection of what we're talking about.
Beautiful. I love this. Well, you know, this is one of my favorite topics, because then the light bulbs go on for people. So there's 4 major elements. Okay. And you can be anywhere on the intensity level or the spectrum of any one of these elements. Okay. Sure. And through that, you have a mix of each one of these elements, and it can be a high or low mix. And so, you know, autonomy is the first one. And so if you're higher in autonomy and measure higher in autonomy, I like to create and act on my own ideas. I believe my ideas are the best ideas. I love my autonomy, high amount of autonomy. And I usually speak in words like I, me, and my. That's a good indicator of that someone is higher in autonomy. If I'm lower in autonomy, I am a natural team player. I like harmony. And I want to be in that kind of environment. Now, the second element is the communication element, but it really is how people process thought. A lot of times people mistake it for introvert, extrovert. Actually, it's how you process thought. And so when we're talking human wiring, there are some people that naturally love to talk about their ideas. They actually create ideas as they think, as they talk about them. They're what I call my external thinkers. They love face-to-face communication. And what happened during the pandemic is a lot of times people had to work from home, right? And so people hire in this element that were accustomed to the face-to-face communication then felt very drained because they weren't getting that natural need for face-to-face communication met. People lower in the communication element are what I call my internal thinkers. They like to think things through. That is their advantage. They like time to think about things. In fact, their best ideas are about an hour after a meeting.
Sure.
Because they've had time to process them. So now it doesn't mean that, everybody talks and everybody thinks, but this is how you process thought and information. The third element is the patience element. So high amount of patience, I like sequence. I like routine. That is the kind of environment in which I best thrive. If I'm lower in the patience factor, I like to juggle multiple things. And the fourth element is what we call our certainty element. And so the higher the amount of certainty, the more information that I want, the more structure I want, the less information, the less structure that I want. Now, to your point, or to your question, Roger, there was a company that was having a high amount of turnover in like their customer service. They would take incoming calls, help the customer. They were having a high amount of turnover in that department. And I said, well, who are you hiring into that? And they said, well, we're hiring those external thinkers who are going to multitask. And I said, well, what are they doing all day? Well, they're taking incoming phone calls, they're helping the customer, and they're typing on the computer. So we figured we want somebody who can multitask. And so as they're telling me more about this position, I'm like, well, they're on the phone all day. It's pretty routine. People multitask, regardless of how you're wired. They're going to talk on the computer, or, type on the computer. And I said, the person who's been in this position the longest, how are they wired? Well, we're sure that's the way she's wired. I said, really? I said, well, let's take her, let's, make sure she's assessed and take the assessment. He's like, okay. And what they discovered was this person was lower in autonomy, like a team environment, internal thinker. What? They're going to be on the phone all day. Hang on. Higher in the patience factor, which tends to get a little bit more chatty, warm. It's a relationship driver when it's on the high side, and high in certainty. The difference is how you train them. You train them with a script. So if the customer says this, you say this. And over time, because they're used to they enjoy the repetition, they learn by repetition, they learn the script, and you get the warm, and you also get somebody who likes to work in that kind of environment. They went from 99% turnover to 0 in 3 months.
Smart for them to actually pay attention to what you had to say, huh?
Now, the people that love the face-to-face communication were going into other areas of the company where they could get that met, like more outside sales, right? Face-to-face communication. Well, no wonder they were turning over. That job over there seems more appealing because now I get to have that face-to-face interaction that I innately need. right? And so the time and time again, you see where companies, and you can use what's called psychometrics words to attract those employees. So a lot of times, are you a calm and professional individual who likes, with strong follow-up and follow-through skills? Now, certain words, again, these are psychometrics, will ping those people positively. They will see themselves in those words and apply for the jobs. So now you're utilizing, from a strategic standpoint, you're utilizing your investment in advertisements in a more effective way to attract those ideal client or ideal employees into your positions. And then they perform those functions at a much higher level because they're innately wired to execute the job in the way that the job needs to be executed.
I'm thinking about my own career as I'm listening to you talk about this. I worked in team environments, highly collaborative, very much a team player, always have been. And ultimately, as is often the case with many of us, someone else made a decision for me with respect to my participation in that particular team. And I realized in that period of time, which I think many people are faced with a similar choice right now, is this is a forced decision-making period. But what I learned in that period of time was I'm highly collaborative, but I'm also very, very strong-willed. And so I needed to be the person to be the leader of the team, not necessarily the collaborator, he or himself, because if those ideas were against the person's ideas who were leading the organization, that's where the friction would get created. And so I think there's many people who are sitting in chairs right now who are listening to this saying to themselves like, okay, well, yes, I kind of understand this, but I'm not entirely sure given my current situation, like, is that a personality test? Is this a behavioral test? So like, how does psychometrics compare and contrast to some of those other things that people may be more familiar with?
Yeah, and they're good and valuable tools, right? Like everybody's really familiar with DISC, right? DISC is a behavior-based tool because of the way that an assessment is administered. So it's going to have more forced choice. You have to force yourself into one of 3 or 4 selections, and it kind of gets more behavior-based, and your behaviors change over time. Whereas when you have a psychometric based, it has more free will, where you choose different words and the words are psychometric. So, let me just explain real quickly, because words are psychometric, colors are psychometric, smells are psychometric. So if you've ever gone into a department store, when we could, you've gone to the cologne counter, you smell it, you love it, you pass it on to your person you're with and they're repulsed by it. That's a psychometric. You automatically respond to that psychometric. So words, smells, and colors are psychometrics. And so the way the assessment, so a free will allows you to check any words based on 2 questions. And then you have your algorithms that give you your profile. And so by that, we can then tell, okay, this is the environment in which you best thrive.
So I'm either I have a job and I'm wanting to leave, or I haven't gone back to what I used to do because I'm on my way to whatever my next thing is going to be. Would there be clues that I might look for in when I'm out, actively searching?
Absolutely.
Could help
Absolutely.
me in this quest for alignment that we're trying to get people to go on?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, really you always want to start with yourself and what you need, right? And so really taking time to really understand yourself. That's number 1, and what you're looking for in your lifestyle and in what consistently motivates you. And so for example, if you know that, I am higher in autonomy and I like to create and act on my own ideas. I like my ideas best. And you know that about yourself. You want to make sure that if you're going in for an interview and you ask, okay, tell me about this. start asking the questions to the company. I know I like to create and act on my own ideas. That is the environment in which I best thrive. How do you like ideas? How are ideas exchanged in the organization? Is there a lot of autonomy, or is there more follow up and follow through? What's the culture like in this organization? And now you can better have questions that you can ask the person that you're interviewing with, because a lot of times people think, Roger, that interviews go one way. They always think, oh, the company, and then I'm just the interviewee. No, this is just as much a part of what you're wanting out of your career as it is the employer to see if there's a fit there. And so it really does go both ways, but I think sometimes people lose their power in that, and they think, oh, this is only going one way. No, it's going both ways. And ask the questions to make sure that there is a good fit.
I won't belabor the point on the employee side, only because the statistics are proving that people are, at least if it's not for this reason, for maybe some of the other reasons that we talked about at the open of the show, they've not made this decision on what they want their futures to look like. I think that part of this is on the employer, and it has much to do with the way they write their job descriptions.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk, so if I'm on the flip side of this, if I'm the potential employer, and I really am trying to attract people and I'm struggling, what might be some of the changes that you would recommend to them to try to solve that problem?
First of all, really understand that you've got to put some thought into what is it that you really need. As an organization, just because you have an opening, does that mean you should fill that opening? Or is it an opportunity to redesign your organization based on the pivoting that you may have done with the organization? And so number one, really take a look at that. Number two, if that is the position, is the position still the same? Have there been changes that position will now be responsible for that may actually change the elements in who you're looking for from a hardwiring standpoint, from a wiring standpoint? And so, for example, what are the major metrics that this person will be responsible for? Do they need to increase sales X% in 90 days? Or is it a type of position that's going to require somebody to create long-term relationships? Because or is it a brand new division where you're trying to get things done very quickly? Based on that information, you may decide that, hey, we need a very different person. The next person for this needs to be wired completely differently. But you really got to start with understanding what are the key things that this person's going to be responsible for? What are the key tasks? So then now you can determine the best wiring to align with that position.
And can you allow for flexible work hours? Can you allow for some work from home? Can you reimagine the way the work gets done in a way that is going to be a reflection of the needs of your potential employee pool, given where we're at this moment, to think that you're just going to be able to bring the same person back to the same type of person back to the same kind of job you used to have had prior to the pandemic. I think that's where a lot of the friction is occurring.
Oh, totally. Because Roger, I think that there's an old model of how that people are being confronted with their own belief systems about how work gets done. And now they've realized, oh, wow, I guess now they're realizing you can get talent from anywhere because they don't have to work necessarily. Now, not all businesses are like this. I mean, there are some businesses that still need people on site, like manufacturing. There are still going to be businesses that require that. But now they're being stretched to think, oh, well, maybe we don't need all of our positions to be here. Now they're rethinking in what we're seeing, because the other business that I own is a co-working and conference facility. So what we're seeing is now more phone calls from employers to say, Do you have space? Because we have employees that can't work from home for one reason or another, but we still need a place to house them. So now they're rethinking what going to work means. It doesn't necessarily mean we need to put everybody up in one location. It could mean co-working. It could mean that we have some of the other spaces that are available. So I think we're starting to see a shift, and it's not, and this is interesting, but it's creating this whole other dynamic on what it means to create a company culture.
Right.
What does that look like? So
Sure.
you've got all these interesting conversations happening. And if I have some people housed at this co-working and some people housed at that co-working, how does that culture influence the company culture that all of these employees work for? So we're starting to see some very interesting conversations that I think are really confronting, because we've had this notion that you have to work in the same building, and that's being redefined now.
All right, this is a podcast about sales. I would be remiss in letting you go without having some conversation about how this concept plays out in sales. Where do you see this really showing its head in the sales game?
All the time. I like to tell a few stories, but it's going to be present all the time. And I'll give one very simple, but something that I see happens all the time. Now, not always, but sometimes you have salespeople that love that face-to-face interaction. That's what draws them to sales. And they meet up with someone very opposite, someone that is more of an internal thinker. And so what happens is, as that salesperson is talking, their prospect might be giving them what's called the blank processing stare. And it looks like this. So what happens is, instinctually, they keep talking. They keep talking and they keep talking. That's not what the person needs. The person actually needs, when you see that blank stare, to be silent, because they're processing everything that you're saying. And then you interrupt their thought when you keep talking. Even though what you need to be is just be silent and give them time to process. I've seen more times that salespeople have talked themselves out of the sale, when in fact, all they needed to do was be silent enough to have that person respond, process the information, and turn what would have been a no into a yes, simply by being silent.
Reminded of an adage that a mentor of mine in the sales organization I first started with told me. So when you get to the end, Roger, the next person who talks wins. And so you get to the moment when it's time for that person to make a decision, shut your mouth. And even if it's agonizing for you to do, the next person who talks wins. So go ahead and just be quiet and let that person have the opportunity to be able to tell you what it is that he or she is thinking. I won't tell you that I'm perfect at it. I may have sprained my talker every now and again in my anxiousness to try to make that thing get across the finish line. I've gotten much better at that over the years. And so I can remember on multiple occasions how what you're saying would have been true for me. So I'm sure there are other people out there as well. The beautiful part about all of this is that for all of you who might be thinking about this as you're listening to what we're talking about and wondering like, well, how do I figure this stuff out? I know this woman named Lisa, and she's wrote a book and she's done an assessment, and she has all of these amazing tools that you can use to help you figure this stuff out for yourself. So Lisa, how can people find some of what it is that you've done that will be able to be of assistance to them?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, accelerateassociates.com/hardwiring, and they'll find a lot of different resources. Also accelerateassociates.com. My book is on there that identifies each of the hardwiring elements, talks more about that, and just some keys to remember and notice when you're talking to people, so that when you deliver communication, you deliver it the way they want to receive it, which is the highest form of honoring the other person. And so lots of different resources that are available on my website.
So there you have it, folks. It's not a personality assessment. It has not a behavior thing. This is the word of the day, psychometrics. Let's all get really well versed in this, and we'll make Lisa even more famous than she is already. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciated the conversation.
My pleasure, Roger. Thank you.